problem is turning it off is the problem. We're good to go? Okay. Planning Commission meeting of February 3rd, 2021 will come to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Some people are slow out there, I think. Secretary will call roll, please.
Commissioner Hodge.
Here.
Commissioner Rice.
Here via Zoom.
Commissioner Gray.
Here via Zoom.
Vice Chairperson Tolson.
I'm here.
Chairperson Mann.
Here. And the only one here, but that's okay. Approval of agenda. May I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Motion made by Commissioner Hodge.
Second by Vice Chair Tolson.
Thank you very much. A second by Vice Chair Tolson. Unless there are any objections, the agenda stands approved. May I have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes.
Motion is made by Commissioner Rice. May I have a second?
I second. Dawn Gray.
And we have a second by Commissioner Gray. Again, unless there are any objections, the minutes are approved. We're rolling right along here. Declaration of conflict. The secretary will read the declaration of conflict, please.
If any member of the Planning Commission may have a conflict of interest or any reason why that member must abstain from consideration of any matter on this agenda, he or she should so declare at this time.
Are there any declarations of conflict? Hearing none, we'll move on to public statements. All those wishing to speak on tonight's staff presentation that are in Zoom or are going to be calling in on the phone, you'll have the opportunity to make your public statements after the staff does their presentation in item number 11. However, if there's somebody else out there that wants to make any kind of statement on anything other than the staff presentation on housing, raise your hand, clap, point, do whatever you do on Zoom. Let us know, and we'll get you in now. But if it's on housing, let the staff do the presentation, then we'll give you your time to talk.
Yeah, I'm curious about that, Chairman Mann. The item does not list as a public hearing.
Correct.
So I was curious if it would be appropriate for anybody who wishes to speak now, since there is no public hearing element to the new business item being presented by staff.
The thought process is if some of the questions or some of the comments are going to be answered or discussed by the staff presentation, might as well do the staff presentation and then let the public speak.
Well, I'm not opposed to that. I don't have an objection to it, but I think that we needed to at least address it because it's listed as no public hearing. So that's fine with me if we want to do that. I guess we have that latitude.
Mr. Gibson, any comments?
Yeah, I could elaborate on that for the Planning Commission. This is also advertised as a community workshop, so it's a workshop being held during Planning Commission. So it's advertised as a workshop where the public can participate and provide comments. And staff felt it'd be most appropriate to hear the presentation first, then open it up to members of the public.
Okay, I mean, certainly the members of the public will have their time to speak, so I'm not sure if it matters where we put them, so I agree that we'll put it after the staff does their presentation. Correspondence. Is there any correspondence from the Deputy Director, City Planner?
Yes, Chairperson Mann and members of the Planning Commission. There are two sets of correspondence. We provided you a supplemental agenda item to 11B1, the Housing Element Workshop, with several emails provided to you received after preparation of the staff report up until approximately 3:30 today. We also received 5 additional email public comments / statements received after 3:30, which were emailed to you and placed at the dais. Also regarding the housing element.
Okay. Any other correspondence?
And yes, no other correspondence.
Consent calendar, nothing on consent calendar. Continued business, nothing on continued business. And that brings us to where we are now. New business, staff presentation. I believe Sean Gibson will be introducing our speaker.
Good evening, Chairperson Mann, members of the Planning Commission. I'd like to introduce our Environmental Services Director, Stratus Paris, who's going to present the housing element update, informational presentation, and the related team involved with that process.
Very good. Thank you, Sean. Good evening, Chairman Mann and Planning Commissioners virtually. Tonight, staff and our consultants are presenting the first public workshop for the City of Simi Valley's Housing Element Update. Since 1969, California has required that all local governments adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in the community. California's local governments meet this requirement by adopting housing elements as part of their general plan. Our general plan, as you know, serves as the blueprint for how this city will grow and develop. California's housing element law acknowledges that in order for the private market to adequately address the housing needs and demand of Californians, local governments must adopt plans and regulatory systems that provide opportunities for and do not unduly constrain housing development. As a result, housing policy in California rests largely on the effective implementation of local general plans and, in particular, local housing elements. Our housing element was last updated in 2014. This new 6-cycle housing element update will last 8 years from 2021 to 2029. The housing element does 3 essential things. It identifies Simi Valley's housing conditions and needs. It establishes the goals, objectives, and policies that are the foundation of the city's housing strategy. And it provides an array of programs to create vibrant and sustainable neighborhoods across the city. I want to make it very clear that the Planning Commission is not approving anything tonight. Rather, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to do 3 main things. One is to provide an overview of housing element law and consequences of noncompliance. 2, to explain required components of the housing element. And 3 is for a discussion of the timeline needed to complete this process. Assisting staff in this endeavor are the consultant team of Rincon Consultants and Veronica Tam and Associates. In 2020, the city advertised for a request for proposal to assist in our housing element update. And in April of 2020, the City Council awarded a contract to our consultant team. Rincon Consultants is a leading environmental consulting firm based here in Ventura County, and they do work throughout California. Rincon has assisted the city for many years on a wide variety of matters, including planning studies, environmental consulting, and technical assistance. Veronica Tam and Associates was the city's housing element consultant for the last update in 2014, and we are very happy to have her back. Veronica Tam and Associates is an architecture and planning company and have assisted many cities throughout California with their housing element updates. And with that, I will introduce Veronica Tam for the rest of tonight's presentation. Veronica?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think before we start the presentation, I think the chair has already commented on this, the process of commenting on the housing element of providing public input. We'll do the presentation. Our thought is that the public would have the opportunity to ask questions or provide their input at the end of the conversation. So with that, I want to just give an overview of the housing element. What is a housing element? What are the requirements, and what is the process that we're going to undertake in order to update the housing element for Simi Valley, and definitely to receive public input, your ideas and thoughts about housing needs, and also how to meet that needs in the city. As Charles mentioned before, like part of the housing element is part of your general plan. It's one of the mandated elements of the general plan. What really important about the housing element is that it's probably the most regulated element of the entire general plan. It's subject to very detailed statutory requirements rather than guidelines. When you talk about the housing element, when you talk about the general plan, the horizon is usually about 20 years. The planning horizon for the entire general plan is usually about 20 years. But the housing element has to be updated every 8 years according to a statutory schedule. And the schedule that we're talking about this time is the 2021 to 2029 planning period with the adoption deadline of October 15, 2021, but it does have a grace period of 120 days. What also sets the housing element apart from the rest of the general plan is that it has to be reviewed by a state agency for compliance with state law. The agency responsible for that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. I think throughout the entire housing element update process, you'll hear that we mention HCD quite a bit because they are a very important component or entity during the housing element update. When you have a housing element that's required to comply with state law and is required to be submitted to a state agency for review, that there are consequences for not complying with state law. Most importantly is the risk of litigation. In the past, the housing element did not have as much teeth in terms of its enforcement, but since 2017, there's been a lot of housing laws passed by the state, and they're really focusing on enforcement. Specifically, it assigns gives the housing HCD the authority to monitor non-compliance and refer that jurisdiction to the state attorney general for litigation, which has happened to a couple of communities before. For example, most recently, the city of Huntington Beach. They were sued by the attorney general for continued inaction and they settled. The more infamous case was the city of Pleasanton. They were sued by a nonprofit, but joined by the attorney general. What the outcome of that particular lawsuit was, the city of Pleasanton was suspended from issuing any building permit for more than a year until it reached a settlement agreement. And we're talking about not just residential building permit, it's any building permit for more than a year. There have been other litigations brought by developers, nonprofits, and individual property owners for various reasons. The housing element is probably the most frequently litigated element of the entire general plan. If you are end up in a court situation, in a litigation situation, the court can fine the jurisdiction up to $100,000 per month until the jurisdiction gets the housing element compliance with state law. And lastly, but not least, is ineligibility for state funds. Increasingly, there are more funding that either requires that you have a housing element that complies with state law to be eligible to receive those funds, or that the competitive funding application assigns a very heavy weight to the housing element compliance in order for an application to be competitive. So without a housing element that complies with state law, you may not be eligible or you may not be competitive for state funds. Now, there are some housing elements requirements, as I mentioned before, is heavily regulated in the government code. And in the housing element, when we talked about the requirements, there's some key components of the housing element. Mainly, you look at the housing needs in the community. And we look at the housing needs not only from a current housing needs perspective, but also a future housing needs. How are you going to address the housing needs in the community over the next 8 years? What are you going to do in terms of goals, policies, and objectives, and also rules and regulations in such a way that you are accommodating the needs, addressing the needs in your community. And that brings to the analysis of constraints and opportunities. You have the needs, and you also need to look at the constraints and opportunities you have. When we talk about the constraints, we're dealing with, in the housing element context, we're primarily dealing with governmental constraints. We do have to look at environmental constraints, financial market constraints. We also have to look at some other kind of private market or non-public related constraints. However, you're legally obligated to mitigate governmental constraints, rules and regulations that you enact or you have control over as a local jurisdictions. If those are found to be constraining housing development, you're legally obligated to mitigate the governmental constraints. The other components of the housing element is look at opportunities, resources that you have. And we'll go into that a little bit more. We have to make sure that your land use policies and your development regulations do foster housing production in your community that meets the needs in your community. And that whole process is called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and we'll go into that a little later. The other two components of the housing element is accomplishments. What have you been able to accomplish as a jurisdiction in terms of providing housing to your community, in terms of providing assistance to your residents, and how does the accomplishments that you were able to achieve in the past inform you in terms of devising a new housing plan for the next 8 years? So the last component of the housing element is the housing action plans, the programs, the policies, and the goals and objectives that you want to implement over the 8 years in addressing your needs. Now, when we send the housing element to the state for review, there is a key component of the housing element review by the state HCD. That's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, RHNA. RHNA, to some extent, is a very top-down process. The state decides based on population projection, building activities, employment growth, immigration, outmigration, all of these factors would come up with an overall growth projection for the state and how much housing is needed in the state. Then it takes that overall need and allocates it to the regions. Each region gets a number that it's responsible for. In Southern California, our region is the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG. It's a 6-county region, and that's Riverside, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, Orange, Ventura, and Imperial. These 6 counties together get an allocation of 1.34 million units. That's a very, very significant number. Unfortunately, that number is non-negotiable. Ventura County gets a little bit, about 15% of that, in about 171,685 units. The county, each jurisdiction within the county gets an allocation. And for Simi Valley, we're talking about 2,786 units. Now, the whole concept of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment too, I think we need to explain it a little bit. That it's not necessarily saying that you have that much housing needs generated from within your own community. But this is the amount of housing growth that you need to be responsible for, your share of your responsibility as being part of the region. That's why it's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. 2,786 units. Again, that is also a non-negotiable number. So, but the Regional Housing Needs Assessment is not a production obligation. You don't have the ability to influence the market. You don't function as a developer, as a local jurisdiction. Therefore, the RHNA is not a production obligation, it's a planning requirement. It obligates the city to plan for it. You must have land use capacity. You must have development regulations that are conducive to development and therefore can accommodate 2,786 units. Production is not a requirement, planning is a requirement. The RHNA is divided into income categories according to state law: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. That kind of income category is aligned with the area median income. Very low income are those who makes no more than 50% of the area median income. Low income is 51 to 80%. Moderate income is 81 to 120%, and above moderate income is more than 120%. Now, that kind of income category, if you look at the city's current income distribution, you are leaning towards the more moderate and above moderate income category. And that's really the reason why, and if you look at your regional housing needs allocation assessment, the income allocation, you have a higher level of lower income. That's the whole model of the RHNA, is that it wants to bring every jurisdictions closer to the regional average. So therefore, if you are a generally lower income community, your RHNA would be leaned towards more of the upper income or moderate income allocation. If you are generally considered a moderate and above moderate income community, your allocation will give you a higher allocation in the lower income categories, with the goal of eventually bringing jurisdictions within the county more on the even level. It will take many years for that to do it, but that's the whole process. Is called impaction correction. So for your regional housing needs allocation, 2,700 units or so, or 2,800 units or so, we have about 45% being low and moderate, lower income, and then 55% of that being moderate and above moderate income. Now, again, because the RHNA is not a production obligation, it's not saying that the city has to build all these units at this income level, because it is very expensive to build affordable housing at lower income. But you must, as a local jurisdiction, accommodate that, provide the opportunities for that. So it uses land use and development intensity, density as a proxy for feasibility. And essentially, the state is saying that for lower income housing in communities such as the city of Simi Valley, we're talking about a default density of 30 units to the acre or higher to be feasible to facilitate lower income housing. So what it's saying is, at that level, at that kind of density, it's feasible for a nonprofit, it's more feasible for a nonprofit to make an affordable housing project pencil in and pencil out in that kind of zoning district. It's not saying that it would be able to build that without financial subsidies, but it's saying that at that kind of density, it's more feasible to build it at a reasonable amount of subsidies, and so that the nonprofit or whoever is building the affordable housing would have a better shot at being competitive at funding at the federal or state or county level. So when we're talking about this 2,800 units or so, we're looking for vacant and underutilized properties with the current general plan and zoning capacity that would allow the city to accommodate that units. So over the course of the next few months, that's what we're going to have to do, is looking at the city's current general plan. Do we have the ability to accommodate low and moderate income and above moderate income too? Don't forget about that. We have moderate and above moderate income. So typically the density or the type of housing we're looking for for moderate income would be apartments and condominiums and townhomes. When it comes to above moderate income, essentially single family homes would automatically be counted towards above moderate income. It's not likely that single family homes in your community would be affordable to lower income or moderate income households. So over the course of the next couple of months, that's what we have to do, is to figure out from your general plan and your zoning, do we have enough capacity? And if we do not, what are we going to have to do? You have some time, up to 3 years after the adoption of the housing element, to make adjustments to your general plan and zoning in order to accommodate what you're not able to accommodate within the current general plan. But that's something that we'll be working on in the next couple of months, and we will come back to you after that. So our plan is there will be a second workshop in March that we will go over the what are the strategy for the regional housing needs allocation, where the sites, do we need any kind of adjustment in your land use policies in order to make the regional housing needs allocation. Then with that information, definitely direction from you and the community will go back and draft the housing element. And then we'll conduct another housing workshop again to review the draft housing element with the community and then send it off to the state for review. The state's review takes 60 days. They have 60 days to review your housing element for compliance. We are required to address their comments. And so hopefully once we complete the review, we would be able to negotiate to a point where we would get a certifiable housing element or compliant housing element and bring it back to you for adoption in the fall. And so that's kind of the game plan for the housing element. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great presentation. Stratus, is there other people going to be presenting? Nothing else from the city? So we're going to open it up to any? Yeah, we'll do that first. Any of the commissioners have any questions before we open up the public hearing or the public testimony or the public comments? Sorry.
I do have, Commissioner or Chairperson Mann, I do have one thing that I would like pointed out, and that's if either Ms. Tam or Mr. Peros could just explain for the people in the audience here that what low income would be if that was adjusted for a salary. So when we talk about low income, how much money somebody would have to make per year to buy a low income house?
What is the AMI for Ventura County?
I'll look it up when I don't have it off the top of my head, but generally the area median income is adjusted annually and it's adjusted by household size. So the one-person household for a very low income would be very different than an 8-person household. Today's market, when I'm looking at it, a typical low-income household, a one-person household is your college graduates. But I'll look up the actual number and report back to you.
I can add, we have Associate Planner Eric Chen here. He's our entire housing division at this moment. So Eric has some of the numbers here he can introduce into the record.
Perfect.
Well, good evening. Based on our region's outlook, for a standard household of 4, you're looking at 80% of area median income comes to $90,250. Again, it is $90,350 for a household of 4. And that would be approximately $2,258, which is the percentage of, which is the amount, which is 30% of their gross annual income that will go to housing.
So when you say 80% of the AMI at 90,000, so we're going to add another 20% to come up with the AMI, so it's about 110,000?
So for 100% of the AMI, which is the median income, comes to $97,800.
I'm sorry, what number is that, 97?
$97,800.
And that would be for a family of 4?
Yes. And then for the moderate, which is 120%, that comes to $117,350. And then based on the other RHNA categories, we have the lower, actually the very low category, which is $56,450 for very low, which is 50% of AMI. Again, it's $56,450.
Okay.
That is before taxes, so that will be gross, before taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Chen.
Chairman Mann, I have a fast question for Ms. Tam.
By all means, please.
Ms. Tam, could you put up the last slide that you had that identified, that provided the timeline?
Okay. Oops.
Which of these, if any, is the Planning Commission expected to participate in, similarly to what we're doing this evening, or in any capacity?
I would imagine all 3, like the workshop number 2 and workshop number 3.
And then, and would we be involved in the adoption hearings?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners with any questions? Commissioner Gray, please, yes.
So I'm not sure if this is too complex of a question, but does the city in general have any sort of, or the state have any sort of calculation on if the city is approving businesses at income levels of whatever it is that the city should also have affordable housing to match that? Or does this calculation of the 2,786 take that into consideration? The one thing that I've been hearing a lot of people's concerns is if we get a lot of businesses that are coming in with minimum wage jobs, are people going to be having to commute, putting a lot of stress on our freeways? Is it something that if the city is approving high-end businesses versus low-end business, does that affect our numbers on being able to produce these figures?
The regional housing needs allocation or assessment model used by SCAG really actually, those are the two key factors that allocated the numbers. One is job accessibility. The other one is access to public transit and transportation corridors. And those are the two main reasons that how they allocate in the model. So they do take into account communities that would have the ability to provide jobs and also the ability to access transit.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Tan, would I be correct in saying that essentially that ship has sailed? Because the SCAG has, rather they've come up with the numbers, those are the numbers that are given to us. And as you said before, those numbers are non-negotiable. So it seems like that train has already left the station.
Right. There were about 52 or 54 jurisdictions that appealed the number, but only I believe one jurisdiction got a reduction of 215 units, and that's it. And so the rest of them, I think they're finalizing the arena right now. Supposedly today or tomorrow, but I think they are postponing it maybe for a couple more weeks. The number is fixed. There may be some minor adjustments because of the 215 units reduction. But when you spread that across 198 jurisdictions in the SCAG region, the impact would be minimal or non-existent.
And Commissioner Gray, I would like to maybe further add, one of the themes I think we're going to be hearing tonight from the public, at least from some of the comments that we've seen in their letters thus far, is the need for both, jobs and housing and trying to maintain a balance between both of those components. And of course, everything we do here in the Simi Valley isn't in a vacuum. It's really part of the larger region. People that live in Simi Valley, a large portion work outside of the community, and so they're driving out. Whereas people that can afford, maybe with lower incomes live in the LA area, but they drive into Ventura County to come to work here for maybe some of the lower paying jobs. So we see this regional transportation issue each and every day. One of the tools that we can look at for what we can do here in Simi Valley when it comes to affordability is maybe the discussion of a inclusionary housing ordinance. It's something that we currently don't have in our code. And it is something that can be used to mandate that each and every project of maybe a certain size, multifamily, let's say, needs to provide some component of it to be affordable. Right now, a project can be it could be 100% market rate, and that's perfectly allowable under our current rules. There has been discussion over the last few months, if not years, both with the commission and the council, about the feasibility of having an inclusionary housing ordinance to encourage projects to have each and every one of them to have a affordability component. So that might be a theme we hear tonight.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay, then let's go ahead and open up the public comment part of this meeting. I'm assuming that staff will just do it in the order for which they were people were logged into for the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, so Senior Management Analyst Julio Ramirez is on the Zoom to be muting and unmuting people requesting to speak. And we would suggest that we would start with the attendees that raise their hands first wishing to speak, and then we will double check anyone left after that to see if they wish to speak. Perhaps they didn't know how to raise their hand or have technical issues. We'll check with them also.
Okay.
So,
And I'll just ask each speaker, you're limited to 3 minutes. Please use consideration in your public comments so that you don't run into somebody else's time. So whenever you're ready, call the first person.
Yes, Commissioner. The first person is Grant Keller.
Grant, are you with us?
Grant, please unmute. Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Cool, thanks. Well, I'm Grant, as you just said. I'm a local teacher in Simi, and I just want to first acknowledge like how thoughtful I think that this forum is. It was well publicized, and I really appreciate you seeking out this feedback. So thank you. And as a Simi Valley native, you know, I went to Valley View and I'm a Simi High alumni. I'm pretty aware of the landscape of Simi Valley. I'm pretty aware that it's nearly impossible for young people here to provide themselves with housing. You know, if you do have some gift money, then you are able to purchase a condominium or a single family residence, and that helps because of your family background. But a majority of young people growing up here have little to no chance of creating wealth through housing. Since rent is so high, workers in Simi struggle to get by, and they cannot save for a down payment, a healthcare cost, a childhood education cost. A setback puts you into debt if you are living in Simi. People have to leave where they work in Simi Valley to try to live in more equitable cities. So there's a housing reality gap here in Simi Valley that needs to be addressed. So I believe that there are two ways to remedy this. Two housing options that I would really like to see prioritized during your term, Commissioner Rice, Commissioner Hodge, Commissioner Gray, are single residence occupancies and mixed use developments. First, about single residence occupancies. Young people in Simi just don't have the income to support a 1-bedroom here. You know, the 1750 in Patricia is about $1,700, so it kind of matches up with the name there. And trying to save for a home, paying $1,750 in rent on top of bills, so it comes up to about $2,100. You know, with the competitive salary, you're coming out even, just like I said previously, on any setback gets you back to debt. So without the single residence occupancies, there's really a struggle for young people and working people in Simi Valley, and we're just segregating ourselves from working people. And second, I'm timing myself to make sure that I don't go over time.
You can go a little bit more, but you're doing okay.
Thank you. And second, for younger people, like with competitive salaries, you know, as a teacher, a fourth-year teacher, I take home about $3,400 a month. So with the competitive salary, I don't see that many attractive options here because I just see those condos that, you know, don't really lend themselves to my, you know, preferred lifestyle. So mixed development housing would be great because we would be close to local restaurants. We'd be close to local retail, and I would pay a premium for that type of situation. So, you know, for the affordable housing, single residence occupancies, I think are the way to go. And then for the next level, the mixed housing developments are the way to go. And those are two things that I would really appreciate the planning commissioners to prioritize during your terms. And, you know, I think as just people growing up in Simi, having the hope of staying here, being close to family, giving back to their own communities, giving them avenues to do that, I think, would be very worthwhile and just fulfilling. So all in all, please advocate for SROs, single residence occupancies, and mixed use developments during your term. And I really appreciate this forum, and I've really appreciated watching some of your meetings. They're kind of the nerdy meetings, but nerds rule the world. So that's what you're doing. So take care, stay safe, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Next participant.
Yes, the next participant is Ruth Mann. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you fine. Please try and limit it to 3 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Again, I want to echo what Grant said and say thank you guys so much for having this open forum. And my laptop is about to die, of course, as soon as I unmute. So sorry about that. But I can talk while I'm plugging in my laptop. So just a little bit about me. My name is Ruth Mann, and I was born and raised, I'm a rare breed. I was born right here in the Simi Valley Hospital 23 years ago, almost 24 years ago now. And I've been here ever since. I went to school here, starting preschool all the way up until high school. And then I went to Moore Park College for 2 years, only to transfer to UCLA. So I've been pretty local. I only moved out for 2 years to go to UCLA, and I'm class of COVID-19. So I was back here, before I knew it, back in March of last year. And so housing in this town is really important to me, especially as a postgraduate, coming into my first job, my first real big girl job, and making my own money, and seeing the prospects of maybe moving out of my parents' home. And so something that I've noticed is that a lot of my peers that are my age, that I went to, that I grew up with, went to preschool with, graduated high school with, are moving out of Simi Valley because they just can't afford to live here. And so I understand California is expensive as well, but there seems to be something about Simi Valley as well that people just can't seem to afford to live here, especially on their own. And there's not many units, apartment units and stuff like that where they can, go without having to purchase a house. And so that's really important to me, is to find a place. I personally am very comfortable here. I love it in Simi Valley. I don't want to leave. It's a reason that I'm, looking for law schools that are local. It's a reason that I went to UCLA that's really close. I love living here. That being said, I don't want to live in my parents' house for the rest of my life. So having the ability to move out into maybe an apartment complex or a single resident complex or unit would be great. So I think single resident units are essential for people my age, and also just more affordable units in general for maybe, people my age that have children or are getting married that can't afford houses. I think multi-use housing is extremely important. As someone who, was living in LA at UCLA for 2 years, almost all of their units are multi-use, and it's not only convenient, but, it saves space and it allows for a lot more housing. We also need housing close to jobs and transit, because I know that a lot of people are still working in Simi and they're having to, even if they lived here and they move out, they're having to commute, which causes, overflow on our freeways. And, the 118 is great so far. So I would hate for it to turn into the 405, because that's a nightmare in itself. And I think that, sadly, I've seen a lot of shopping centers close in Simi Valley. I'm old enough to know when the mall here was hopping, hip hopping, but I would love to see those shopping centers and parking lots rezoned maybe to become residential areas with apartments, maybe mixed use buildings, to put those to use. And as someone who has lived, I've been privileged enough to live in an affluent neighborhood up in Simi Valley. I live, close to Big Sky. I just don't see the purpose of making many more Big Skies in Simi Valley. I think there are plenty of those here, and I think that we definitely need to focus on making more affordable housing. I think that I'm not sure if this is the same.
Ruth, I need you to wrap it up. You're well past your time, please.
Last two, Safe Park. I think we need to have more Safe Park options. And I love what they're doing in LA with tiny housing for unhoused people. I think that would be amazing and beautiful to see in Simi Valley. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Again, ladies and gentlemen, try and keep it to 3 minutes. Set a timer on your phone and time yourself, and please be prepared to stop at 3. Next.
Next speaker is Reese Holland. Please unmute yourself, Reese Holland.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
We can hear you well, Reese. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody here. Thank you everybody in attendance, listening at home. We really appreciate it. Obviously, we'd be meeting in person and, filling the chamber there, but things being what they are. And that said, I want to second what both Grant and Roop said. I am a lifelong resident here as well, 36 years, and quite honestly, I've never seen a time where the wages I can earn from a job that I could get here were ever livable, whether entry level or even with the skills that I have now. I've been working remotely since 2014 for a tech company in San Francisco. So that's where I was able to actually kind of make the means to be able to, afford to live here and build up a nest egg a little bit. But it's never something that I thought I would be able to, use the skills that I have to find a job in Simi Valley and work there and not be pretty much, one missed paycheck or one incident away from being in debt the entire time. It's, we're talking about the cost of rent here. People don't just have to pay rent. They've got utilities, they've got insurance, they've got groceries, they've got educational costs, taking care of their kids, taking care of their family that might not live in Simi Valley. There's so much that people have to pay for that these rental costs are just absolutely too much. We really should do what we can, fight long, fight hard, tooth and nail if we must, to get our rent prices set in a completely different way. And I know that's not the thing we're going to do here, but trying to get it changed from being based on average median income to minimum wage would be a much more equitable solution. Minimum wage gives us a way to actually base the cost of rent on what jobs people can actually get in an area and how much it pays them. If we go up from there using that as our baseline for very low income, we actually have a chance to actually have people live and exist in Simi in an equitable way. Using average median income is like the sort of de jure segregation tactics that are described in The Color of Law, which, by the way, is a book I recommend each and every person listening to this reads if you get the opportunity. The Color of Law, fantastic. It's tragic, it's fantastic. Other than that, again, echoing what my peers have said here, cheaper units, getting ADUs, getting mixed use low rises everywhere, tiny housing for unhoused folks, like all of those things are important. I don't think we really need single occupants houses in Simi Valley anymore. It's like Sim City. At some point, you just got to build apartments. You've just got to build, large scale structures that hold many, many, many folks, keep them as efficient as possible and keep them as pandemic proof as possible. Because sadly, I don't think this is ending anytime soon. And this isn't going to be the only pandemic in our lifetimes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Cassandra Douglas.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, Cassandra. Please proceed.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. My name is Cassandra Douglas. I am a lifelong resident of Simi Valley. I do want to say my grandparents were here. They came here when my mother was a teenager. I will consider myself the third generation here. None of us have ever been able to afford a home in this city. I've lived here all of my life with the exception of 10 years when I myself had to move away from my home to be able to afford to live. I'm grateful now that I've been able to make my way back here, and I'm able to kind of afford to live here. I'm grateful to be able to raise my children here. Simi Valley lacks affordable housing options. Our younger generations are suffering as a result. We see many people in the same situation I have been in who have to move away and possibly not be able to afford to come back. We do need more affordable housing options in the city. There's a lot of old entire strip malls that can be converted into mixed use housing with retail centers and residential locations in one space. We do have a lot of empty lots that can be converted into inclusionary housing, which seems like what everyone else is saying, as well as with the arena goals, seems like it's necessary. Like other people have mentioned, I'd love to see tiny homes, single resident occupancies as part of a plan for housing for the city. I believe that families, not every family wants a big house. Not everyone wants the responsibility of having a big home. I think that duplexes and multi-residential locations are a good idea for the city. For people like me, who is a single parent who doesn't want the responsibilities of a yard, who also doesn't want the, the logistics behind getting or the laws behind getting a condominium and being tied to a homeowners association. We do need dense infill housing near jobs and transit. Climate change is real. Having better options for us to commute via train, via bus, via bike is necessary for the future of our city, for the health of our city. I believe the city can also figure out a way to assist the unhoused population, possibly with transitional housing of some sort. That is it. I'm going to yield the rest of my time. I appreciate this opportunity to give a public statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Next.
Jackson Piper, please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, Jackson. Please proceed.
Great, thank you. My name is Jackson Piper. I am one of the founding members of Ventura County YIMBY, which is for Yes in My Backyard. It's a grassroots volunteer organization forum to advocate for better housing and more housing within Ventura County. I'm going to begin by speaking to the general public in Simi Valley, because really you are the ones that are going to be reacting to these proposals, and ultimately the pressure from you as a public is going to decide how housing occurs in Simi Valley. And so I'm asking you to really consider the implications of what you want for Simi Valley and also what is needed for Simi Valley. I'm part of this housing advocacy organization because for the past half century or more, development in California has been defined by one primary archetype, and that is the sprawling single-family home subdivision. Think of it as Pleasantville, if you remember that movie. It definitely is nice to live in some ways, but it also is a very inefficient way of using land. And most of the communities that have developed along this this type of development have used up most or all of their available land on this low density, low height, sprawling development. And now we've come to a point where there's an estimated 3 to 4 million housing units that have not been built over the past decades that are now missing and causing a housing crisis in California that contributes to our severe homelessness crisis because all of those things are interlinked. We have transportation systems so oriented around the car that we can't think of any way else to develop other than around the car, around the single family house, dominated by a garage in the front yard. We need to rethink the way we do things. Even cities like Simi Valley, like my own city of Thousand Oaks, like the rest of Ventura County, need to be flexible in how they accommodate new housing. We need to develop more densely in some areas if we're going to preserve the majority of the way things are in other areas. And to be honest, all areas need to be willing to accommodate some change so that we can meet our housing needs. These RHINA goals seem terrifying, I'm sure, to a lot of people. 2,786 units over 10 years is not a lot of housing, really, when you think about it. The need throughout California, even throughout our little corner of it, is so much greater than that. So please consider not only what your community has been, but what it needs to be, what it can be if it's developed well over the next 10 years when you are looking at these proposals. Don't be afraid of density or other forms of transit besides the car. Think about how well-planned communities can be created, even in Simi Valley, in other ways than you are used to, please. I'm not sure how much time I have remaining, so.
You're actually up, so wrap it up, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Please keep an open mind while you review these documents, and thank you very much, citizens of Simi Valley.
Thank you very much. Next.
Chairman Mann, members of the commission. So we have 3 people left with their hands raised and several that have not raised their hands. The 3 people, we got some additional hand raisers. Please continue to raise your hands if you'd like to speak. And I see a number of more hands going up. There are 4 or 5 attendees that did not register for Zoom. And at the discretion of the Planning Commission, if you'd like to try to hear from those people at the end, you can request that. So with that, we can continue with the registered speakers first.
Please, thank you.
Philip Luz, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Phil Luce. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear feedback from the public on this issue. I just want to echo what a previous speaker said. This was really thoughtfully done, so we appreciate that. Obviously, the RHNA requirements alone make the need to build more housing a really pressing issue. But even if the state of California wasn't pushing us to build more, I think it's the right thing to do. If we don't get this right, we will create long-lasting adverse impacts on our economy, our residents' quality of life, income inequality, our natural environment, et cetera. So I know I don't need to point out to you all the challenges that Simi Valley faces, but just for the benefit of those who are listening, I'm just going to recap a few anyway. We have a severe lack of affordable housing options, especially for young people, working class families. We had 0% economic growth in Simi Valley pre-COVID. It's obviously exacerbated since COVID started. A bankrupt mall, struggling businesses all over town, housing costs rapidly outpacing inflation and the average salary increases in the area. We have a growing number of renters, according to data, who are being classified as rent burdened or severely rent burdened. We have a city budget that is overly reliant on cuts to staff and services to remain balanced because of stagnant revenues. We have overcrowding with multiple generations living under one roof for financial reasons, which obviously became a really big problem and a challenge during COVID. And the issue is that all of these are impacted by our housing crisis. Again, I know you don't need to hear this, you already know, but again, for the public. And what we need to do about this is clear. We need to build more. When our city council called on local economist Matthew Feinup from Cal Lutheran to come in and advise them on how to kickstart our local economy, he said unequivocally that building more housing and building more diverse types of housing is the key change that Simi leadership could take to revitalize our economy. So, because we want to protect our open hills, we have such little infill space. What I'm hoping that this body and that the city council will do is to create a plan that does a few things. First, upzone much of the city to allow for more density. We need to prioritize redevelopment projects on some older rundown lots. Prioritize mixed use developments, as some people have said, that meet the needs of younger generations that have been shown to help boost city economies. Prioritize requiring low income and very low income housing as part of new approved projects. I know Moore Park has been doing this. I think we can do a better job of this as well. We could take advantage of some of the state programs that incentivize building near public transit. We have a train station that I know nearby has mixed use zoned already that we could be maybe thinking about taking advantage of. Show a willingness to build up rather than out into our surrounding natural environment that can reduce wildfire risk, use our land much more efficiently. So all of these things, I hope that you can be a big part of pushing forward. We need to completely shift our approach to help the city meet many of the challenges that are facing us down the road. And I trust that you'll do the right thing and help us get there. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll see the rest of my time.
Thank you for your time. Next.
Judy, please unmute yourself.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Great. Good evening, commissioners, planning staff, and housing element update team. I just want to say that I appreciate the city's inclusion of the public in the process. Again, reiterating what just about everyone before me has said, this is a wonderful opportunity. And it's great to get the input from a wide variety of perspectives on the city's growth requirements. I don't really have any comments at this time, but wanted to note that I'm here for Mike Rovner, who owns a large parcel of land in the city that he would like to have considered for rezoning to meet the new RENA requirements. And we've submitted a letter identifying the location and would be happy to work with the city as needed if there are any questions once you review the letter, we would be happy to continue discussions. That's all that I have. I appreciate the opportunity to be involved and look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you very much. And our next participant
is Kimiko.
Good evening. My name is Kimmy, and I am a lifelong resident of Simi Valley as well. I myself am a planner here in California, and in urban planning school and the professional field of planning, mixed-use development with affordable housing is the gold standard. Mixed-use development with affordable housing is more obtainable for our current residents and encompasses a blend of residential, commercial, and industrial real estate that will support the revival of family-owned businesses and further incentivize spending in Simi Valley. Increased traffic may be a concern to some residents, but contrary to popular belief, mixed-use development has been proven to reduce vehicle miles traveled and increase urban walkability scores. High urban walkability scores support mental and physical health through active transportation such as walking and biking. And on top of that, projects that support active transportation will increase the city of Simi Valley's likelihood of receiving funds allocated by the CTC or the California Transportation Commission in the next cycle. With proper planning and hopeful competence and teamwork of our new planning commission, I truly hope the commissioners listen to the community and recommend mixed-use development with affordable housing in our city. Thank you. Yield my time.
Thank you very much for your time and your input. Next.
Our next speaker is Marlene.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Thank you. Please proceed.
Good evening, Planning Commission and staff. My name is Marlene and I'm a lifelong resident. I am a millennial who myself is also struggling to find housing in the city. It's important that it is important that the city plan housing that is economically exclusive. We can attract more business and keep the city vibrant. How can we attract business and keep the city vibrant if we are not willing or able to house workers? Personally, I would like to see developments geared towards millennials. I want to see more single room occupancy developments, a development of studio apartments, duplexes, fourplexes, ADUs, tiny homes, all of it. I would also like to see a better use of land by implementing as much mixed-use developments. Simi Valley is kind of boring and it's not very walkable or attractive, but we can improve it and together we can revitalize it. I look forward to Simi Valley making a positive housing contribution. I also want to say that I 100% support the inclusionary housing ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Next.
Our next speaker is Joe Pichowski. Mr. Pichowski.
Good evening, Commissioner, Chairman Mann, members of the Planning Commission. I'm a little concerned about what I'm hearing tonight. I did appreciate Ms. Tam's presentation. I thought it was very well, it did a nice job of explaining what's going on. And I've done a little bit of research into this, and the Orange County Register just the other day published a scorecard for every city pretty much in Southern California, including all the other cities here in Ventura County, as well as Calabasas and Agora Hills. And the one thing that really seems to stand out in those scorecards is that nobody, and I do mean nobody, is meeting their RHNA requirements. The RHNA, and I know Ms. Tam said that the RHNA requirements are quote unquote non-negotiable, but the fact remains that nobody's meeting their requirements. Nobody is, I mean, for Pete's sakes, the city of Calabasas hasn't, the city of Agora Hills hasn't authorized one moderate income or low income, very low income unit. And I understand the need for that sort of housing, because when I first moved to Ventura County back in 1996, I wasn't making that much money. I was about 25 years old. And what I ended up doing for quite some time was I ended up renting a room in somebody else's house. Finally, when my wife and I got married in 2006, we moved into an apartment together in Thousand Oaks, and we were renters in Thousand Oaks for 11 years before we were finally able to afford to buy our own home here in Simi Valley in 2017. And frankly, the only reason we were able to do that was because of the death of a family member and the inheritance of that family member's home. There is no simple answer, and I don't envy you guys. But the fact of the matter is that for what there's short-sightedness going on here. The short-sightedness is that if we just start building dense apartments, nobody is earning any equity in those homes. And equity in housing is the quickest way for anybody to achieve wealth. We need to be building even low income and very low income single family homes, because of the fact that those types of residences will build equity for the individuals involved. We don't need another monstrosity like this commission approved recently, and the city council approved because the state was breathing down their neck. What we need is to figure out how to build single family homes that are affordable, that will build equity for our residents, because that's what's going to help develop wealth within our community. Reselling a home is you're going to make a profit at some point, because you're building equity in that home every time you make a mortgage payment.
Joe, I need you to wrap it up. You're past your time.
No problem. And that's what we need to be focusing on, not building up higher and anything else that we're hearing tonight. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Again, I'll ask everybody to time yourself, keep it as close as you can to the 3 minutes, be fair to everybody else. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Rebecca. Please unmute yourself.
Rebecca, are you there? Do we want to come back to Rebecca and go on to the next one?
We could come back to Rebecca on, see if she comes back.
Okay. Let's go ahead and go to the next one then.
So if I may, if we can, if there's anyone else who had not raised their hand that registered, Julia, if we want to go through a list and just make sure that they want to have a statement or not.
Okay.
Sure, I can do that. I have Margaret Noble. I'm not sure. I don't have any other raised hands, but
Okay, so I see a couple other people who did not raise their hands. If
This is Margaret Noble. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Margaret.
I did not wish to speak.
Okay, Margaret, thank you for your time and your participation.
Thank you.
So if there's anybody else wishing to speak that registered, they should raise their hand. If not, we'll assume that they don't want to speak. Assuming that.
okay, so Mr. Mears, it looks like Rebecca may be back on the line.
yes.
Who do we got?
Rebecca, please unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you fine, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for helping me work through that issue there, a little audio issue. Well, good evening, Planning Commission and city staff. My name is Rebecca. I am almost a lifelong resident of Simi Valley. I can't claim that because I missed out on 2 years. I am a founding member of Ventura County YIMBY, which is yes in my backyard. And I want Simi Valley to make a commitment to housing that addresses social equity. I 100% support an inclusionary housing ordinance. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that that's something that maybe we should further explore, have a presentation about. Very important. I believe that it is vital that we house all our residents. Not everyone has the opportunity or wants to be a homeowner. I don't believe that a single family housing is the way to plan out this city. For a city that supports business, let's make sure that we are supporting the folks that are working at these businesses. We need to make sure, or what I would like to see as far as the city would be public housing. I would like to see low-rise buildings. I would like to see apartment complexes go up that have single-room occupancy as well as studio apartments. I would like to see multifamily units. I would like to see ADUs, duplexes, and fourplexes as well. I would like to see developments that are thoughtfully planned out for walkability, that are built near transit, as many have previously mentioned. In order to make our city vibrant, these things are important, and we need to make sure that we're addressing housing for everyone, not just a few. And given the fact that we have supported SOAR, means we're not going to be building out, and it's crucial that we look at infill developments, that we reassess parking lots that are currently empty, and not just because of the pandemic, they've been empty for a really long time, so that we can revitalize those areas, we can make it more walkable, and people will go buy. I mean, we need to just make it more affordable and invest in not only the residents that are currently here and are able to secure housing, but for the future residents of Simi Valley, if we want to support, any type of economic growth and just our residents in general. So I thank you for putting on this event. I definitely want to thank city staff. I had a lot of questions and they were instrumental in helping guide me so that I could get the information that I needed. So I thank you all.
Thank you very much for your input. So any of the registered participants with their hands up?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any other registered participants with their hands up.
Do we have
at this
any
moment.
any unregistered participants wishing to speak?
I show 2.
Let's go ahead and give them their opportunity, please.
Yes. Sophia, please. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for putting on this event. I think it's really important that the community's voice is heard, and I applaud everybody who has participated in this meeting. A lot of what I was going to say has already been mentioned, so what I'd like to just sum up, I guess, is that in order to plan for our city's growth, we need to adapt to the times and consider diverse housing options. Here is what I would like to see reflected in our housing element update. And again, this is sort of a summary of what we've heard so far. 1, single resident occupancy accommodations. 2, mixed use zoning that can allow for combined residential and commercial use. Zoning for tiny home communities to aid with the income restrictions of our residents, as well as those who are houseless. Approval for overnight safe parking and safe tenting designated areas where resources can be provided to our neighbors in order to both keep them safe and also keep us safe from fire hazards and the like. And rezoning old and empty strip malls and parking lots for residential or mixed use. Thank you again, and I'll yield the rest of my time.
I'm sorry, and for the record, what was your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Sophia Bagdasarian, and I'm a resident of Simi Valley.
Okay, thank you for your time, Sophia. And the last person that wants to speak? Is there another one?
Yes, it's Max Potter.
Hello?
Max, welcome. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
this is Max Potter, a longtime resident of Simi Valley, also a member of Potter Racing Group. So I think a lot of these people on the call today are having a very capitalistic views, but in reality, we need to switch gears into the socialism gear. We need more unity in our economic plans, which will mean that we share spaces. That's going to include housing, public transportation, schools, a lot of things. And I think you guys should be a little more lenient in approving plans for big developments of dense housing that will not only attract people from nicer areas like the San Fernando Valley, but it will bring in more people spending money in the local businesses, such as John's Bagels Deli, which I just spoke to the other day. It looks like his bagel sales were down 2% last year. But if we had more young people who like to spend money frivolously, that wouldn't have been the case, So that's kind of what I wanted to say. Like, don't be such a stickler when you're approving plans and stuff, Just be a little more open, a little more socialistic. And I think Simi Valley will once again become great.
Well, Max, thank you for your time.
And,
do we have any other participants, members of the public on Zoom wishing to speak?
I have one more that did not register. I will call them next. Ryan Valencia, please unmute yourself.
Do you hear me all right, everybody?
No. Okay.
Oh, gosh, I forgot Alan's here. Well, good evening, commissioners. Thank you so much for having this fantastic meeting. And I applaud all of you, and I applaud the staff for putting this all together. Just the few notes that I had to contribute were just things to keep in mind as we go along. We mentioned transportation lines and how we can make sure that, housing is near transit. Within our general plan, there is a second metro stop that is desired. And so that is kind of planned towards the west end of Simi Valley along Mountain Gate Plaza. So, we are looking at double tracking now with Metro, our current Metro station, so that wait times are less, hopefully down to half an hour between rides. And so hopefully that is going to increase ridership. And so as we take a look at that specific corridor, we could really execute and hopefully partner with our developers and trying to make sure that it is transit oriented as that corridor is named after. But additionally, trying to look at where are we in terms of these requests for a second metro stop here in Simi Valley, and how can we plan for the future in that downtown area, that Los Angeles Avenue corridor that we have just within our plan there. I'd additionally add that, as we reevaluate what our housing needs are and where retail space is, COVID-19 has presented a kind of new reality for businesses, that office space is not going to be as utilized as it was in the past. So as we look at zoning, as we look at what currently there, there's going to be a decline in the utilization of these office spaces, and how can we ensure that perhaps that space can be better utilized towards residential or mixed use for that matter. I really want to applaud a lot of the young people that were on this call earlier, and I'd kind of re-emphasize their points as to ensuring that young professionals are a priority in our housing needs. We should take every level of government that we have, city, county, state, federal, anyone that owns property within Simi Valley and is holding it for whatever reason, take stock of it and see if there's ability to utilize that towards housing. And I really appreciate those that have already brought up the inclusionary housing policies that other communities are doing to ensure that there is diversity in socioeconomic backgrounds of residents. So if we can move towards that, very much appreciate it. And the last point I want to make is a big opportunity along the Royal Simi Greenway, and how do we utilize walkability and connectivity between neighborhoods, and how those are going to connect with bike paths, how we're going to get people off the road. A lot of those neighborhoods that are along that greenway can be better utilized for that connectivity purposes, kind of like the paseos that we see in the city of Santa Clarita, for example, that is very much characteristic like Simi Valley. Anyways, thank you so much. Very much appreciate your time and your due diligence on this important subject.
Thank you very much. That's it. Nobody else?
Mr. Chairman, I show nobody else wishing to speak at this point.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll go ahead and we'll close that part of it. Ladies and gentlemen that did speak, thank you very much for your time and for your input. Does the city have anything that they would like to add? We can call it rebuttals or additional information. Then we'll ask the Planning Commission if they have any questions that they want to say.
Sure thing. And again, I'm sure Veronica's there listening as well. So if she has any comments, we'll leave some moments for her to add in as well. I did want to take a moment to respond to some of the comments we did receive from the public. There was several comments about single room occupancy, or SROs. Obviously, that was one very popular project that the Planning Commission approved not that long ago, back in 2020. We did our first SRO project. When we did the housing element update, the prior cycle back in 2014, one of the requirements was to add that to our zoning rules, and that's exactly what we did. Unfortunately, a lot of people just don't take advantage of that rule. And we finally got one after a lot of work. And one thing we realized from that project was that we needed to improve our SRO standards a little bit, making them a little bit more defined. So staff is currently working on the SRO ordinance update, and we actually hope to bring that to the Planning Commission hopefully in the next few months here, and then on to the City Council. And that'll better define all SRO projects. Currently, SROs are allowed in CPD zones or zones with a mixed-use overlay. And there is a lot of that type of zoning out there. It's just that we haven't received a lot of proposals. So sometimes that's the trick. We put colors on a map or we put rules in our book, but it's really all about what does the market respond to. And I think maybe with some tighter rules or better definitions on our SRO code, maybe it'll help encourage that type of project. One thing we can always talk about, we hear a lot of phrases tonight, but one thing I didn't hear was workforce housing. And I always equate that housing development is economic development. And we talk about the balance needed between jobs and housing. And the Planning Commission approved about 1 million square feet of industrial projects over the last couple of years. And with all that new space, including the 2 new Amazon projects, that's hundreds of new jobs. And unfortunately, we don't always have the workforce housing to go along with it. So it's one thing very important to remember: the economic viability of our city is dependent on the housing of the workers here. One of the other things we realized this past year with COVID is that it changed our landscape a lot. And one thing that got repurposed was our parking lots, especially in our commercial centers. What you've seen is a lot of restaurants with some temporary permits have been able to put some outdoor dining. And it might have displaced a few parking spaces, but we noticed that the world didn't come to an end when we lost a few parking spaces. And so one thing we can look about maybe when we fix our codes or look at our codes is maybe our parking standards. Maybe we dedicate much too much area for parking, and we can find better ways to use a lot of our empty parking lots. Clearly, the parking lots are empty due to COVID, but like some speakers did mention, they were empty before COVID as well. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to maybe right-size our parking standards. One key thing for everyone to remember every budget year is that our city resources, our budget, is dependent both on property tax and sales tax. And I know the first reaction is to knock down all our commercial buildings and put housing there, but then that also may negate our ability to raise sales tax revenue. When we do online shopping, only a certain portion of that gets redistributed back to Simi Valley. That money goes to a county-wide pool, and from that pool it gets distributed. So we don't always get a ton of revenue from online sales. So that the important thing to realize is currently cities live on sales tax. And so if we eliminate the 4% of the city that's zoned commercial, we could be undermining our budget. So again, everything needs to be in balance to have a healthy workforce and an economic area with jobs and sales tax, but at the same time meeting our housing needs. And how do we do it? So one thing we did here today was expanding the mixed use options. And clearly there's areas to introduce housing in underutilized commercial centers. And we have projects in the planning department right now that are doing exactly that. The goal here is maybe to understand why. And Veronica or Sean, can you bring up that the city general plan map?
I can do that, yeah.
All right. And I want to show the general plan for the Planning Commission, but also the audience, for those that aren't familiar with how our general plan depicts Simi Valley. The land use map, again, isn't the way the city's built. It's the way we anticipate to grow over the next 20 years. And so sometimes we put colors on this map, and it doesn't look like that in real life. And that's part of it is just the market. The market doesn't respond to putting, let's say, a commercial use on Tapo Street between the 118 freeway and Alamo. You know, that's that block up there in the yellow. Or there's sometimes we put a mixed use overlay, like what we did at our last housing element update. And some projects took advantage of it, like we saw at Tapo and Alamo or the SRO project, but not as many other projects really took advantage of it. And I think one thing we realized is that our mixed use ordinance is unwieldy, and we need to find a way to update and improve our mixed use ordinance. Our code does allow it. And the only way we're going to get 2,800 housing units somewhere here in Simi Valley is by more than likely upzoning or rezoning lots of areas of our property. The big question tonight or going forward is where, and that's what the March 17th meeting is going to be talking about as well. So we heard from one speaker, Judy McLean, mentioned the Rovner project. That was one that actually needed a rezone and a general plan amendment in order to make their project work, and needed to be upzoned, but the community on that night was not in support of that project. So we have to look at those few parcels out there. Does it make sense to put new residential uses in those underutilized areas? Maybe also looking at expanding our mixed-use overlay to other parts, maybe of Los Angeles Avenue, perhaps, because we have on one side of the street, but not on the other. I heard one speaker mention about our MetroLink site and maybe the potential for doing a second one. I did have those conversations with the Ventura County Transportation Commission. Is more than likely we're just going to have the one with the new double track. So maybe the question is can we better utilize our MetroLink? There are a lot of speakers that were encouraging housing near transit, and that's one of our major transit stops. But unfortunately, it's right up against a mountain, so you really can't build housing all around it, just on a certain side of it. But there is some underutilized areas in that immediate vicinity that the Planning Commission and the community may examine. Can we increase residential density there? There's a city-owned parking lot right next to the MetroLink. Can we use that parcel? It is designated for development, but no one's been able to figure it out or pencil it out yet. There's an empty vacant lot in that nearby area at LA and Stearns?
Ralston, Stearns.
Yeah, I always forget the Stearns or Stearns. And so, what can we do there? Because sometimes we have in our general plan things like enriched landscape setbacks, which makes it really hard to do infill development on some of those parcels up and down on our commercial corridor, because we want to drive down the street and have a lot of landscaping before we ever see the parking lot or the building. And that was good in a certain era when Simi Valley looked like the way it did maybe 40 years ago, when it was like an auto strip. But we greened it up and it looks good. But land is precious. Land is a limited resource. And when you have large parking lots and a lot of landscaping, are you best utilizing that land?
Right.
And so I think we need to look at our development standards and these enriched landscape setbacks, and can we eliminate it to foster or encourage infill development, especially on the smaller parcels, less than an acre, that are up and down LA Avenue or throughout the city on these commercial arterials. One of the other challenges Simi Valley has, it didn't come up tonight, is our flood zone issue. Large swaths of the city is designated by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to be in a flood area. A lot of residents pay a lot of flood insurance, and a lot of that is just mapping. And in reality, is it ever going to flood in some of these areas? And the city is working, the Public Works Department is working on updating this model, so maybe we can reduce the amount of areas in the middle of town on our valley floor that are designated as flood zones. And if we can shrink that area, we can bring a lot more parcels into play. Currently, one of the barriers to infill development is our flood zone modeling. And finding out resources, I know we've reached out to some of our congressional representatives, and our Deputy Public Works Director is doing a fantastic job is trying to solve this project this problem one project at a time. But it's clearly an impediment to growth and infill development here in the city, our flood zone issue. The good news is that the city did receive about $810,000 from the state of California in the form of SB2 funding and LEAP, Local Early Action Plan. I think these acronyms. And that $810,000 is being used by the Environmental Services Department in our planning efforts to improve the ability to construct more housing here in the city, meaning it's helping to pay for this housing element update. It's going to be used to help update our development codes. It's going to help do things to streamline the development process. One thing I heard tonight was a lot of support for accessory dwelling units, and that's very important. Simi Valley is about a third open space. It's about a third single-family residential, and the rest of it is a combination of all those other colors. So when you look at a third of the city being about the single-family residential detached neighborhoods, that's about 31 or 33,000 units. And if we could find a way to streamline or encourage more accessory dwelling units, meaning having a pre-approved plan at the building counter that people can just say, oh, that's the one I want to build, version 3B right here, and I can put that on my property. That could save a lot of costs for people rather than have each and every person have to build their own design and build it. They can take a pre-approved plan. And that is something we're looking at on our code update to help facilitate more ADU production in the city. One of the gaps in our current code is the inability to allow duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, what's referred to as the missing middle housing, easily in our development process. And it's not addressed well in our code, and that should be a code update. And it's something I've brought to our housing element consultant team, and hopefully that it'll be something we can encourage or foster, because clearly we have a lot of areas of town that could use either an ADU or be straight converted to a duplex. And our code should facilitate that type of development. One thing is, for some reason, 100 years ago, everybody could build housing. And that's how some cities grew, like Chicago. They grew by 2 million people in just a couple of decades. And how did they do it? Well, everybody was building houses. Nowadays, it seems like we rely on big institutions or big developers to provide our housing, and we wait for them to do it. And it's because I think the way money is, it squeezes out the little guy. So I think the ways to encourage incremental growth and getting everybody in the game to share in housing, whether it's ADUs or duplexes, is a good viable solution. We can still rely on big developers to do big projects, but getting more people in the game is an incremental way to ensure both wealth building for those individuals, as well as having a more viable plan to, especially in our community, where a lot of our housing growth could be low-density infill neighborhoods. I think that's a lot of the general questions. I'd be happy to answer anything the Planning Commission has, or maybe before we do that, to see if Veronica, Tam, or any other staff have anything to add.
By the way, I commend you for doing that whole presentation that you just did with a mask. That's amazing. That I don't think you took a breath.
I'm fogging up my glasses, but I made it through it.
I want to make a general statement about, I also heard a lot about social equity throughout the comments received tonight. And definitely that is a major theme of the new state law regarding housing element affirmatively furthering fair housing. One of the requirements of the housing element law is that you do not concentrate housing, in particular low-income housing, in a single spot, and that you also provide a variety of housing types and options for your residents. And I think that's when we do it on March 17 to present the strategy, it would have a variety of options and locations for housing. So it's not just one type of housing, it's not just one location.
Okay. Any planning commissioners have any questions for staff or Ms. Tam?
Well, I have a question for Mr. Peros there, and that was about tiny homes were mentioned a few times, and we have had discussions in the past about that, but there's no place in the city zone for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the building code, one of the challenges with tiny homes on wheels is that they're not a typical dwelling unit type building that's anticipated by our building code. They're considered a vehicle. And there's this bit of a challenge in finding out how to accommodate those. One example the Planning Commission approved was the Les Wagner project. That was that RV campground over off of Kuhner Street. Mm-hmm. And one of the advantages of tiny wheels is that in the event of a flood, which we have the potential here in Simi Valley, is that you can move them off the property. And there are other similar zones in that immediate area that are unutilized. I'm thinking of the one at Smith and Kuhner. And that you can actually put a tiny wheel on a home on wheel development right there, and in the event of a flood, wheel it out. And the zoning allows it. And I push that idea out there to folks all the time if they want to do it like what we're going to call it a recreational vehicle campground. And that's one way to accommodate tiny wheels on homes. But to put them in backyards of houses, it really needs to be on a foundation and connected to city sewer and city water. And we treat it like a regular building at that point. And so the concept is fine. It's just that the tiny wheel homes on wheels product, there's just a little bit of an inconsistency with the current building code. And that's a challenge for them at this time.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Peros, the ADUs do not impact the rider numbers. Is that correct?
No, we can actually gain credit for some of them in certain cases. They all count as housing. And will they count for low income or moderate? That's something that I believe we can put them in the moderate category, if I'm correct, Eric. And so, so they do provide housing. They do help us with meeting the moderate category. And it's something that's hard to anticipate on how they're
I have a
going to
follow-up
build.
question on that. Let's assume that an ADU goes into the backyard of a home that is very low density. It's considered housing for persons who fall in the high income category. Does that ADU go against that RINA number or something else?
And it's more. I'm sorry, Veronica. You want to go ahead?
Travis, you wanted me to, yeah, because there are specific methodologies that's developed by the state HCD to how you count for ADUs and what income categories that you're able to account that for. Generally, you can project based on your historical trends, especially with the relaxed state law between 2018 and 2020, how much ADUs have you been permitting, and so therefore over the next 8 years, how many units you can project. And one thing Stratus also mentioned is the fact that you are working on maybe pre-approved plans to facilitate ADUs. So we may be able to get an increased trend of ADUs instead of just like based on the last 3 years. In terms of income affordability, the state again has approved an income distribution for the SCAG region for the ADUs based on rent surveys conducted by SCAG. Generally, you can take advantage of about half of your ADUs to be considered as low income.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Do we have anything in our development code, building code, for container homes?
It's going to be, at the end of the day, be a building code requirement.
Okay.
We allow, let's say modular homes or manufactured housing. You can put that on a single family lot.
Mhm.
And in some cases, let's say over down by First in Los Angeles, the neighborhood down there, you'll actually see a few manufactured homes on those lots. And there's nothing wrong with that. Our code allows it. And I actually think it was an effort to allow, one of the keys here is, can we have a diversity of housing types? And we're looking for not just tiny houses, but penthouses and everything in between. And so I think we want to understand that, having a diverse housing to mention, represent a different income levels is one goal, but different construction methods, like you're kind of indicating there, is, again, if you can meet with the building official and have him explain that how this meets the building code, you could probably get there.
Okay.
One of the comments in the letters that I saw was, I think it's about design guidelines. And one thing we haven't talked about was our, need to have objective design standards or maybe design guidelines to ensure we get the right type of development. Because another phrase I heard a lot tonight was low-rise buildings. And from a planning perspective, that means things that are like 4-story or under. And now some people here will think 4 stories is a high-rise, but when you go to other cities, you realize that no. So, I mean, can we accept 4-story buildings here in the city? Sometimes we have a 3-story development, and the only way to get that 4th story is through a density bonus waiver or concession.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, maybe getting on the same page of what is the height, the objective design standards, the shape of Simi Valley that we would like to encourage. How do we be sensitive to adjacent single-family neighborhoods that might be 1-story or other 2-story developments, and making sure that not only do we encourage new development for new housing, but be sensitive to the surrounding context of the neighborhood that it's within.
Okay. Last call. Any other questions, comments, remarks, jokes, suggestions, recipes? Okay. We appreciate your time. Sincerely. Great presentation. Without having to bring back the schedule, so it is approximately March to come back?
March 17th.
March 17th? Okay. Then we can move on. Oral communications report. Staff, do we have anything else to report that hasn't been gone through?
Yes, Chairman Mann, we provided you the tentative agenda for February 17th. In addition, we mentioned that the Planning Commission Academy is still upcoming. It looks like they're still trying to schedule a date and time for a virtual conference. So as soon as we find out more information, we'll offer that up to the planning commissioners.
Okay, perfect.
And a couple of you received, who got reappointed and appointed, if you could please sign and turn in your code of ethics forms back to staff.
Okay. Any planning commissioners have anything to report? Dawn, just because you don't come to the dais, you still need to eventually bring the donuts and the coffee. So I'm adding those up here.
I completely forgot about the donuts and coffee again.
That's okay. It's quickly becoming steak and lobster, but we'll work it out. Mobile home rent mediation board.
Let me know which donut shops you like. Or should I just go around and get a little of everybody's?
You got to go to John's Bagel Deli now. So
John's Bagel Deli. Okay.
Check with Chief Livingstone. He'll be able to tell you the good ones. I understand. Mobile home rent mediation board.
Yeah, no items tonight, Mr. Chair.
Tree advisory board.
No items tonight.
This concludes the meeting of February 3rd, 2021. Next scheduled meeting will be on February 17th, 2021. This meeting is adjourned.
Not all.